So this is probably going to be the last podcast. I may change my mind later, but I'm thinking that this is probably going to be the last one for the year. And this podcast, I wanted to teach you a little bit about light and specifically about colors and how we see colors and the light coming from the sun and all those kinds of things. For this podcast, you can just set up your paper on page 25 in your notebook. You can set it up Cornell style, just regular notes for this one. So we've been talking about waves and about sound and about light. And remember, light is, visible light is one of the many different electromagnetic waves that come to us from the sun. And that light moves as a wave. It's a transverse wave. Now, as any kind of wave strikes an object or comes into contact with an object, just like any other wave, light's not any different really, but it can be transmitted it can be absorbed by the object, or it can be reflected from the object. So those are the three main things. There are other things that could happen that we're not going to talk about. These are the three that we're going to focus on. Now, if light is transmitted, that means that it passes through the object. It's passing through it, right through it. And there are three ways of thinking about that. If the object is transparent, it's completely see-through. It lets all the light through. Like this window. You can look through the window. You can see everything out there. You can see it fairly clearly. There's really not a whole lot of difference between where you're looking through the window and where you're not looking through the window. That's called transparent. Then there's this word translucent. Translucent means it lets some of the light through, but not all of the light. And it has like a smoky appearance. It looks fuzzy. Okay, so in this picture here, that would be translucent. You can have the light coming through, but you can't really see the shapes too well through that translucent panel. And then in this diagram, I like this. We have a transparent glass where you can see the little Martian guy. And then you have the translucent glass where you can kind of see there's something in there, but you can't really tell that it's the Martian guy. You can see the green and the blue, and that's about it. So that's the difference between transparent and translucent. Finally, there's this word opaque. Opaque means it does not let light through. So really, when you're talking about transmitted light, light is not transmitted through an opaque object. Okay, this means, like, I guess the wall. Think about the wall here. Light cannot pass through the wall because it's opaque. The second thing that can happen to light waves as they strike an object is that they can be refracted. Okay, and this usually happens through, I guess I should say it always happens through transparent objects. So the light can be transmitted. When it's transmitted, it can be refracted. And this happens because the light waves slow down when they travel to a new medium. And we've talked about that before. Sound waves do the same thing, and you saw that in the Slinky lab. All waves, when they transfer between one medium and another, that's a form of energy transfer. And so there's going to be some of that energy is going to be lost as heat. And so with waves, we call this refraction. Now, the amount of the refraction depends on the actual energy of the light, which is related to the color of the light, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. But for now, what you need to know is that the refraction of light, or the bending of light, is what works in what we call a lens, like in a magnifying glass or in someone's pair of glasses. There's a piece of glass or a piece of plastic that has this shape, and as light enters, it is bent as it passes through from the air through the lens and out the other side. And so we call that's an example of refraction. The other example I have here, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but when you're sitting there having a glass of something, if it has a straw in it, you notice that it looks funky. It looks like the straw is not where it's supposed to be. It's sort of bent over. You might have also noticed this if you're in the swimming pool and you look down, your feet aren't where you think they should be. And this is because of refraction. as the light waves pass from the air into the water, they're bent. And so when we look through the water, it appears as though things are in the wrong place. That's refraction. Now, I mentioned a minute ago that the amount of refraction is going to be due to the energy in the light waves, and that's related to the color. So let's review a little bit. Remember, visible light coming from the sun is a form of white light, but it's actually made up of all the colors of the rainbow. Remember Roy G. Biv: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. And I may have showed you something like this when we were talking about the electromagnetic spectrum. Remember, these are your gamma rays, your X-rays, UV, infrared, microwave, etc. And then right in this narrow region, we have the visible spectrum, or the visible waves of light. And now, I think I talked about this the other day, but the longest wavelengths are around 700 nanometers, and these are the reds. And then we have our whole rainbow going down to the shortest wavelengths, around 400 nanometers, and those are our blues and violets. Now, the wavelengths are longer in the reds, shorter in the blues and violets, but frequency and energy is kind of the opposite. So the reds have the lowest energy, and the blues and violets have the highest energy. And it's because of that energy and that frequency that they have that things get bent differently when light is refracted. When white light comes to us from the sun, the atmosphere sometimes can separate out those colors due to refraction into all the different wavelengths, so we can see their different colors. This is going to happen if there's water vapor in the air, or it could happen because we're using a lens or something like that. So in this top picture, this is a prism. And what a prism does is it refracts light. You see here at the top is the beam of light, the original beam of light, and then it's passing through this piece of glass, which is shaped just right. It's called a prism, and it bends the light, it refracts the light, and the blue wavelengths are bent more than the red wavelengths. You see the diagram here, you can see what's happening. The blues and violets are bent a lot more than the reds as the waves come in. And because of that, a prism can separate white light into its component colors. That's the same thing that's happening in this rainbow, even though it's happening in nature. It's not a piece of glass that we're using, but sunlight shining through the water vapor in the air does the same thing. It's going to bend the blues and purples a lot more than the reds, and then we get a beautiful rainbow in the sky. And you can see this little diagram is kind of explaining it. Water droplets reflect all colors. Actually, it's not reflecting, though, is it? It's refracting all colors, but at different angles. Whoa, hang on, little lizard, hang on. Okay, so we started out by saying light waves do different things when they hit objects. One of the things that light waves can do when they hit an object is they could be absorbed or they could be reflected when they hit an opaque object, a solid object. Usually, in most cases, some of the wavelengths, some of the light is absorbed, and other wavelengths or other amounts of the light, parts of the light, can be reflected. Whatever is reflected, we see as a particular color. So let's say we see an apple, like in this picture. On the apple, we're shining white light. Maybe it's the light inside your house, maybe you're outside and it's sunlight, but the apple appears red to our eyes because it is absorbing all the colors except the red wavelengths. All the colors except the red, and so the red is being reflected, and it reflects right into our eye and we see it as red light. So every object, the color it appears is the color it doesn't absorb. It's the color it's reflecting. So red objects are red because they reflect red light and they absorb all the other wavelengths. White objects appear white because they reflect all the colors. So all of those wavelengths are coming back to our eye and we see that as white. So white reflects all. Black objects appear black because they don't reflect any color. They absorb all of the colors. Okay, so you shine white light on a black object, no color is reflected. You shine white light on a red object, red is reflected. You shine white light on a green object, green is reflected. So if you think about what's happening with white and black objects, you can understand why it is, for instance, living in Florida, you understand this, why you wouldn't want to wear all black in the middle of the summer. Because it's going to make you warmer, because it's absorbing all the wavelengths. Whereas if you're wearing white in the summertime, most of the energy is being reflected off of that white clothing, and it actually does make you feel cooler. So think about this question. Most of the objects that we see are illuminated with white light. Most of our world is white light. It's either sunlight or lamps or lights in the house that we make to be white because that is what we're used to. But think about this. If you shine a red light, only red, no white, or a green light on an object, will their color change? They sure will. So if you shine, for instance, a red light on a red apple, it's going to look red because the red will be reflected. But what if you shine a green light on a red apple? In fact, it will appear black because it will absorb all of the light, and we perceive that as black. Whoa, what happened there? Okay, the last thing I want to talk about with this lesson has to do with the difference between colored lights and colored pigments. What you're probably most familiar with has to do with colored pigments. Like if you took art with Mr. Broadway, you learned about colored pigments and mixing pigments together and what colors you'll get. But colored lights are very different. The primary colors of light, red, green, and blue. Primary colors of pigment, cyan, magenta, and yellow. Okay, so these two diagrams show you kind of how color mixing works with pigments versus lights. With pigments, what you're doing is as you mix colors together, they subtract. In other words, they absorb more and more and more light. But with lights, when you mix them together, they actually add together to produce more and more wavelengths instead of taking away wavelengths. So for instance, if you mix red and green pigment together, you usually get brown. And if you take an art, I'm sure Mr. Broadway taught you how to get a nice brown with some red and green and maybe a little bit of yellow. But if you mix red and green light instead of pigment, you actually make yellow light. So when you're mixing pigments, you probably know about mixing blue and yellow to get green and all of that good stuff, red and blue to get purple. But when you mix lights together, green and blue, you get your nice cyan, red and blue, you get your magenta, but red and green, you get your yellow. And if you mix them all together, you get white. Whereas if you mix them all together with pigments, you're going to get black or a dark brown color. Now, if any of that made sense to you, I can explain to you now how TV and computer screens work. In a TV or computer screen, and you can try doing this with, if you have a magnifying glass at home, look real close at the television. The screen is actually composed of tiny little pixels of colored lights. Teeny, teeny, tiny ones. They are red, green, and blue, the primary colors for lights. When you combine them in different ways, you can see all the different colors, which is how we can look at the computer screen and we see every single possible color. If all of the three little pixels of light in a given spot are on, then it appears white. If the red and the green are on, then it appears yellow. And they can adjust the amount of red and green to get oranges and various shades of yellow. And then if red and blue are on, then we see that as some kind of a violet color. So you can see they can combine amounts of light in all those teeny pixels to get the whole range of colors that we see on the computer and TV screen. It's really quite ingenious. Okay, so that's it for the lesson, and since it was sort of popular today for the previous notes, the electromagnetic waves notes, I guess I'll give you guys another opportunity for some extra credit, because it really was something that seemed like everybody liked. This time I'll have you make a little drawing in the corner again, up in the top right corner under the date. And this time go ahead and draw a little heart up in the corner. One or two little hearts. Make them red because that's cute. And this is in honor of my puppy. This is my puppy dog. And her name is Indy, and she's the best dog. So put a couple of little hearts up in the corner of your paper in honor of my puppy dog, and I'll give you some extra credit. But don't tell anybody. It's top secret, okay? It has to be secret because you don't want people getting credit for that if they didn't put out the effort like you did. Okay, so I'll see you in class. Have a good day.
Made with Doodlecast Pro.